as we're still waiting on news of what exactly is going to happen to Michigan, I've been thinking about this from the standpoint of college football playoff rankings. And I need to tell you, on top of you subscribe to the channel, because we just went over 96,000 subscribers, on the way to 100,000 subscribers, that is my national championship, that I think Texas, Michigan has taken on even more significance than it did once we knew that Texas made the college football playoff and won the Big 12 championship last year, because that was one of the games that right away I knew was going to be huge in 2024, because Michigan was already really good, right? And if they lost to Ohio State, maybe that would have been different. They lost a Big Ten championship game. Maybe that would have been different. Maybe if they hadn't been able to beat Alabama in the Rose Bowl or lost to Washington in the national championship, we'd be talking about it differently, but we're not. We're talking about a Texas team that feels like it should be contending for the SEC championship in year one and has a real shot at the national championship in year one of the SEC. We're also talking about Steve Sarkisian having most of the things that Jim Harbaugh had in 2023 with this Texas team. He's got his coordinators back. He's got a starting quarterback that he knows. He's got a lot of production returning. I think they're 26th in production returning with 73%, or 26 in the country. 73% of their production from last year is back. There are questions about who's the go-to on wide receiver, because Xavier Worthy was obviously good enough that the Kansas City Chiefs drafted him in the first round. Jonathan Brooks ends up being drafted by the Carolina Panthers after rushing for 1,100 yards. But C.J. Baxter started out as the starter in that room, and many people believe he's the more talented of the two backs. For me, the question is more about what that defense is going to do against other class defenses. I don't mind telling you that Oklahoma was really good about putting up yardage against Texas last year, and both OU and Texas have wins against college football playoff qualifiers last year, which is pretty outstanding. I'm also thinking about this from the standpoint of how to beat and or attack Texas if you're Michigan and you know that they're coming to Ann Arbor on September 7th. And that game is going to be, I think, the most important through those first few weeks. It's going to tell us a lot about Michigan, what, if anything, that matters from this offseason. It's going to tell us a lot about Texas, who still got games against Georgia and Oklahoma before they get out of the month of October. And I'm looking at what they do well at Michigan, which is run the football and give you great offensive line play, and what defensively is a weakness for Texas last year, and that's basically defense, pass defense in particular. Like, while we're talking about Michigan losing to that Washington team, we're also not talking enough about Washington beating that Texas team by passing for 430 yards. Now, Michael Penix Jr., first-round draft pick, great quarterback, but that was a theme for Texas all throughout the years, pass defense. They just weren't good enough. And some of that was pass rush. Some of that is their defense on the back end. They have made steps toward correcting both of those things. But is Michigan, and Sherrone Moore in particular, going to be given to letting Alex Orji try to throw the ball all around the yard if they know that that is a weakness for Texas that might not be a strength for them? And that really is when we start playing football. We know what you're going to do, or we know what our weaknesses are. Are you good enough to exploit them? Is a question we just don't know the answer to for Michigan, because it's a brand new guy at quarterback. It's a brand new play caller. And as much as I think Michigan is going to be okay to find, this is another year in which pressure's heaping on them. Now, they've had pressure heaped on them for the last 3 years, and they have stood up. They have won a bunch of games, and they won the national championship last year. I think we're going to start talking about this team differently as we learn more about what, if anything, the NCAA does. We have every indication that they're going to do something. That's been reported. But what the extent of that might be, how Michigan might choose to accept or appeal that also is that issue. I just think that Texas also needs the win, because joining the SEC, you want to be one of those dominant teams in that league, because it's one thing, like I tell people this often, it ain't that, for me, Oklahoma got to play in the SEC. It's that the SEC got to play Oklahoma. And the reason I say that is Oklahoma's had the benefit of playing the best of the SEC for the last decade, 2 decades, because we only see the SEC playing Oklahoma in a national title game. Think 2008 Florida or LSU, right? Or Auburn or Alabama. Never got to see South Carolina, right? And when we saw Tennessee, gave them the blues. Don't really have to see Arkansas. Don't really see A&M. Don't really see Ole Miss. Don't really see Vanderbilt. Don't really see Mississippi State, right? So I think that part of the discussion is important, but I also think that Texas wants to show up and be one of those teams that's not Mississippi State, not Arkansas, not A&M, and one way to do that is by going to Ann Arbor as an SEC member and beating up on the defending national champions, the defending Big Ten champions, and we have even more fuel to that. Which conference is better? Because I got to tell you, if Michigan were able to get a win against Texas in Ann Arbor, it will shock a number of people because a lot of folks are picking Texas to win that game because of all the changes and the new head coach, the new, not philosophy, but new way of implementing the philosophy. I know that Sherrone Moore wants to basically do what Jim Harbaugh was doing last year and keep doing that until such a time as he can anymore. But just because you're the guy that helped build the car and the car is fast doesn't mean you can drive it exactly like the guy that was driving the car to a world championship. I think that's what we're going to come into. I've made this analogy before, but I think it fits. I think that Jim Harbaugh is a Titan in Destiny 2, and he went and made another character that is a hunter in Destiny 2, but he built him out like a Titan, right? He made this dude into a tank that can move around and go invisible from time to time. Like it's the prismatic build of the hunter, which by the way is broken because I can shoot my golden gun and I can shoot my still hunt, and I basically got, when I wear my Celestial Nighthawk, all the DPS. That feels like what Sherrone Moore's Michigan offense looked like last year. Is that going to be the Michigan team this year? A broken prismatic build for a hunter? Maybe, we'll see. I don't think that we're giving enough credit, though, to Texas and the well of radiance that they could just throw down and be invulnerable while shooting back at you for extended periods of time. The point here is, in the month of August, we've learned some more about Michigan off the field. We've learned a little bit more about what preseason camp might bring for some. But that game is even more important than it used to be. And that's in a year where you could afford to lose that game if you're Texas and Michigan and still make the college football playoff as one of the at-large members or even win your conference championship. I think it's just going to be a really good test to find out who Texas is, who Michigan is, and what we think of the SEC and the Big Ten through the first couple of weeks of the season. Be interesting to look back at that game and see how, if and when it influences the rest of the rankings as we head toward the first time we're ever going to see 12 teams in the college football playoff.